Okay. Hello and welcome. I'm Sylvia Taylor, Chief Marketing Officer here at ProList. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. Our topic is Interesting Times, What's Going On at the USPS. Now more than ever, this is a key question on every mailer's mind, especially with the unveiling of the Postal Service's 10-year Delivering for America plan. I have just a few quick housekeeping items before we get started. If you have questions during the presentation, please do submit them. We will be doing a short Q&A at the end of the session. Also, as an attendee, you will receive a copy of this presentation as well as a link to the audio recording for it. So there's no need to worry about taking copious notes or missing any information. We do have Leo Raymond, Managing Director of Mailers Hub, here today with us to present this webinar and to go into more detail about exactly what is going on at the USPS and what the plan means to us as mailers. But first, I would briefly like to turn things over to Dave Lewis, who is also here with us today. Dave is Vice President here at ProList, and he has a long history both with Leo and in postal matters and the direct marketing and direct mail industries. Dave, the floor is all yours.
Okay, thank you, Sylvia, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. I've known Leo since back when the Postal Service was operating out of Ben Franklin's garage, and Leo was writing the domestic mail manual. So he's a longtime postal employee. He worked with a number of associations that I worked with also of mail service providers who providing postal insight and advocacy too, working with the senior management and postmaster general and people like that within the Postal Service. And now he's got his own organization, Mailers Hub. And I will say, as a commercial mailer and many commercial mailers across the country, and just mail owners as well, we absolutely rely on the information that he shares, so that we can look smart for our clients. And that said, Leo, it's all yours.
Well, thank you, Dave, and I want to make sure that everyone understands that Dave was not accurate in my relationship with Ben Franklin. He was much older when I was a child, so I'm not quite that old, but close enough. We want to talk today about the interesting times, and I use this phrase, which many people will recognize, as one that is ironic because interesting is not necessarily a nice way to describe what's going on. It's not really an old Chinese phrase, as many believe, but actually attributable to an Englishman in the 18th century and 19th century. So, but even so, it's a great phrase to use at times like this. Today, we're going to talk about a few things, starting off with finances and service performance, leadership at the Postal Service, then a variety of issues, including the plan, and then some of the resources that are available to everybody to try to figure out which end is up in this very confusing world. The figures you see here are for Postal Service's performance through January. I think the February figures will probably come out later today, oddly enough. But as you can see, these are not necessarily promising numbers in many ways, and they are not as good as they were at the end of December. Of course, you had election mail and pre-holiday mail, and then, of course, things over the holidays themselves, which contributed to business for the last 3 months of calendar 2020, which is the first quarter of the Postal Service's fiscal year. January, of course, all that's in the past, and you can see how things really have gone into the dumper. For many years, marketing mail was the largest class by far, exceeding first class mail, which for decades before that was the largest. That hasn't been always been so for the past few months because of the very difficult circumstances under which we've all been existing and doing business. Total mail volume for the month was down quite a bit, over 14% in January compared to January of 2020. And so far for the year is down about 6%. Revenue figures aren't quite the same. And what's going on here is because of the presence of competitive product volume, which is packages primarily. Because everybody was at home during the pandemic, they decided not to go to the store, but to order things instead from Amazon or Walmart or whomever. And that contributed to significant growth in packages, not just for the Postal Service, but for everybody who's involved in the package business, like UPS, FedEx, and everybody else. So in January, things were up almost 31% compared to last January, January of 20, and up almost 30% for the year to date. In revenue terms, you can see the same thing, even despite significant declines in revenue from the major classes. Look at how marketing mail dropped, as a matter of fact, very precipitously. There was still enough revenue coming in from packages to overcome that and to end the month up 4.3% compared to January of 20, and up 9.5% for the year to date compared to where it was at that point. However, that little squib of good news belies of other things that are not so good, including that expenses and work hours are still exceeding plan levels, and that the loss for the year is growing. No matter how good, quote unquote, it may look compared to last year, it's still not the direction in which a prosperous organization's numbers should be moving. We'll talk more about some of these things as we go along here. The next thing you want to look at, I guess, is whoops, here we go. Too fast on the mouse. There we go. Is service performance for the year so far. Needless to say, it's been bad. There are a lot of contributing factors to this. Obviously, the one problem is absenteeism. If you've got pre-holiday and holiday volumes going on, and you have a lack of employees to move the mail, that's going to cause you some problems that are just not foreseeable. The Postal Service has reported that they tried to hire something like 200,000 temporary holiday help, part-time help, non-career employees, but were not successful in finding and retaining the right number of people. And I'm sure that also contributed to some of the problems they saw in that regard. You also had a loss of air transportation, which wasn't such a big deal for mail going from Maryland to Virginia, but was a big deal for mail going from Maryland to California. And so you've got first class mail that would be in those airplanes now having to go onto the ground, or taking several hops to go from one side of the country to the other. And this, of course, had a bad impact on the final service performance of those things. Then you had congestion of the plants, parcel volume coming in, and frankly, the Postal Service just lost the ball. They had to admit it that they did not maintain their processing operating plans and procedures. They didn't have the discipline they needed. They have for first in, first out, FIFO, and they ended up having mail that came in after other mail being processed first, and things being lost in corners on trucks and so forth. And there was plenty of horror stories about that that everybody's heard, I'm sure, about. My Christmas package came in February and so forth. The numbers here on the chart show the abbreviated format in which the Postal Service reported things for their first quarter. The red numbers are situations in which you had a significant shortfall compared to the service standards that applied. You can see that 3 to 5 day which we discussed, was abysmal. 55% almost nationally for the score, compared to 92 and change. It should be 92 and a quarter. And of course, flats, we all know flats are an issue, and whether those are first class flats or periodicals or marketing mail flats, they suffered. The only places where you had good performance, oddly enough, were those highlighted in the yellow. Bulk bound printed matter parcels did well, their parcels. And a few places you had good performance with marketing mail, carrier route, or letters. But for the most part, there were severe problems nationally in service performance. And I'm sure when we see second quarter numbers, probably sometime in May, that would cover the period through the end of this month, those numbers will not be significantly better. This mouse here is very touchy. Here we go. Just to make sure that everybody understands how postal leadership works, because there are a bunch of stories going around in the media about, the president can fire the PMG, and that's just not true. The Board of Governors consists of 11 people, the PMG, the deputy, and 9 politically appointed governors who are nominated by the president, confirmed by the Senate for 7-year terms. And you have this requirement for a partisan balance where you have no more than a 5-4 split. At the present time, you've got 6 people, all of whom are relatively new to the board, all having been appointed or confirmed, I should say, since August of 18. And the reason there was nobody there was because of a feud in the Senate, as the story goes, between Senator Sanders from Vermont and Senator McConnell, who was the majority leader at the time. There were nominees all along to fill vacancies to board seats, but one of those nominees was Jim Miller, the former OMB director under the Bush administration. He had uttered the P word, privatization, at some point, which made him anathema to Bernie Sanders. So as long as his name was among the nominees, Bernie Sanders put a hold on all the nominations, and Senator McConnell said, well, if you're going to do that, then nothing's coming to the floor. So all of these things led to eventually Jim Bilbray, the last of the governors, serving through his grace year, and then there being no governors at all for 20 months, which was just a ridiculous situation. But that's what the former president came into, and he had no one there. So he nominated 6 people over the course of his, 7 people actually, over the course of his tenure. Governor David Williams came and went before the current president was inaugurated. So right now he had 3 positions to fill, and he has sent 3 nominations to the president. One of those is a Democrat, one of those is a Republican, and 2 of those are Democrats, one is an independent. So you're going to have the 5-4 balance in favor of the Democrats, should those all be confirmed by the Senate. Now, the board by law has given certain responsibilities and authorities. Only they can approve price changes, can approve filing price changes or classification changes, which is why when Jim Bilbray after he left, there was nobody in the board. You couldn't have promotions filed in 2000. I think it was 2017. Only the board can hire or fire the PMG or the deputy. Together, the board and the PMG pick the deputy. So you've got certain things that are vested just in that group. The PMG then, of course, hires and fires all his vice presidents and picks whatever he wants and organizes things as he chooses. So what you've got now for the org chart, if you will, is how things were reorganized last August by Louis DeJoy, sorry, and just reshuffled how the different vice presidents operated. He implemented what many characterize as sort of a stovepipe, particularly on the left-hand side there, where you've got a very linear relationship between the executive vice president who's in charge of retail and delivery and the other executive vice president who's in charge of logistics and processing. And we'll see how this plays out in the field. These maps, I'm sure you've seen at some point, we ran them in our newsletter just last issue, show you how beneath the 2 stovepipes, if you will, you've got different organizational structures. On the right, processing and logistics are in. There are 2 halves of the country. There's West and East, which geographically is not quite correct, because the East includes the Eastern processing and the Atlantic logistics area and Southern logistics area, which are the ones in maroon there in the right center. And the Western processing half of the world includes those in blue, which are the Westpac logistics and Central logistics. Now that's processing and logistics. On the left of the screen, you can see a different configuration. That's how retail and delivery is set up into, again, 4 areas which are analogous to the divisions on the other side. And those areas are subdivided into districts, a total of 50 districts now, instead of the 67 we had before. And they have such imaginative names as Michigan 1 and Michigan 2, and New York 1, 2, and 3. So that's so much for the older names that we had in the past. But anyways, this is how things are reorganized now in terms of the management structure, the geographic organization. And last week, on the Postal Service's link newsletter, a news site, what do you want to call it, there were issued the names of the individuals who will now be the district managers and the division managers in charge of each of these organizational elements that you can see on the screen. I have no idea, nor does anyone else at this point know how long it's going to take to get each of these people in place, get their staffs organized, get their responsibilities set up, and get them functioning. And plus, there's an early out being offered for non-bargaining employees. So you're going to have a certain amount of churn going on here as people get promoted, move around, and so forth. The point being is that while Mr. DeJoy may feel this leadership structure is more lends itself to greater efficiency, better line of sight, better consistency, or his favorite word is precision. It's going to take a while for the dust to settle after all this disruption, and until that happens, we won't really know for sure how well his new structure is going to work. You've got a lot of issues going on. Meanwhile, things in the background here about seamless acceptance and movement of financial things from CAPS to EPS. You've got Postal Service's finances continuing to be very, very dicey. Yes, there was a $10 billion grant finally included in one of the recent COVID bills, but costs are still outrunning revenues, and you've got shifting costs because parcels are more expensive to process than letters and flats. And set this against an unpredictable revenue stream. And obviously, UPS and FedEx aren't going to sit around and watch the Postal Service capture package revenue. So how much the Postal Service can depend upon its currently very welcome revenue stream from parcels is really a matter of concern. And they have their obligations, of course, for pre-funding, and they got to buy vehicles. They just signed to buy new mail trucks because, of course, the ones they've got are older than I am, and they're just about as dependable. And you've got other issues with business, going on with shipper insourcing, Amazon taking away volume, and so forth. But at the same time, there's regulatory changes, which we'll talk more about these things going forward here in a bit as we talk about the plan. But you've got changes at the Postal Regulatory Commission that have impacted the Postal Service's pricing authority. Whether it was been impacted for the good or not is a matter of your point of view, whether you're with the Postal Service, whether you're a ratepayer. And of course, what's going to happen in Congress are ever reliable representatives in Congress, what they're going to do or not do concerning the Postal Service. But let's get into the plan. As I was telling the folks at ProList earlier before that we started, putting the slides together here was sort of disrupted because all of a sudden the plan was issued yesterday, so we had to make some adjustments to today's presentation. But we're going to try to cover some of these things at a relatively high level. The premise of the plan, of course, is that the Postal Service's current situation is somewhere between bad and awful. There's a continuing loss of a traditional type of mail, letters and flats, and a growth, at least for now, in packages. So you've got what is termed a misalignment in the processing network, and some air and surface networks that are underperforming and unreliable. And these are all things that are from the plan, these quoted comments. What I find interesting is the statement that current service standards are unattainable. We'll talk more about that going forward. And there's been other things like a lack of investment in delivery and retail. You have an inefficient organizational structure, which we just discussed, how that was addressed. You've got pricing authority concerns. You've got the onerous retirement related expenses, which of course refers to the pre-funding obligation. And you've got this record of losses that goes back several years, probably to 2006, I think. And then, projects into the future. If you're wondering why the number 10 years is relevant here, because that's the budget horizon, the federal budget horizon. And if you talk about things in congressional financial conversations, it's always a 10-year figure. We're going to lose this or make this or have this result over 10 years. That seems to be their span of thinking. So the Postal Service is projecting $160 billion in losses over the next 10 years, unless something is done along the lines of what they're proposing to do in this plan. So let's see, processing. What are they going to do in terms of mail processing? What they're going to do is try to focus more on their parcel business. They seem to feel this is where their future lies, excuse me, and where they want to incent a lot of growth. So this is where they're going to try to become more business-like, in dealing with potential sources of parcel activity, parcel volume. But again, they're not by themselves in this arena, and they are certainly not dealing with inexperienced or lackadaisical competitors. I don't think FedEx or UPS, as I said, is going to idly stand around. Either is going to idly stand around and watch the Postal Service pick business away from them. Plus, you've got Amazon and Walmart and others who are now actually withholding volume from any other outside parcel delivery service and doing it themselves. Just yesterday, I saw some significant Amazon presence, if you will, around where I am. And what they're carrying is volume that used to go to the Postal Service and to UPS. FedEx fired them, basically. So they're becoming a force as well. As far as regular mail volume goes, the Postal Service wants to look at promotions and various incentives to, if not grow, at least preserve traditional volume in letters and flats. The problematic thing here is, as I discussed, the service standards issue. What if you could picture a donut with three concentric rings? The current donut has the overnight service standards in the middle. Then you've got 2-day in the middle ring, and then the outer ring is 3 to 5 day, which is the rest of the world, the rest of the country, essentially. And as you recall, those organizations, that organization, the current standards go back to 2012, at which point there had been a major change that shrank the overnight service standard area, making many things 2-day and pulling things in to 3 to 5 day. What's being done now is there are going to be 5 rings in this donut. The 2-day ring will get a little bit smaller, and the 3 to 5 day ring will actually be separated into 4-day, 5-day, and 6-day standards. 6 days, of course, applying to things like going from Puerto Rico to Anchorage or to offshore situations. But a lot of this is based upon the PMG's opinion, I believe. His findings is his attitude towards the use of air transportation. He considers it unreliable, and he considers it involving too many hands. Getting mail tendered to airlines and then off from the airline and back to the Postal Service, and all the hands that are involved take up too much time. And as anybody who's flown knows, is too susceptible to disruption. So what he's going to do is reduce the use of air transportation and rely more on ground transportation. Well, obviously, since trucks take longer to go places than airplanes, that's going to lead to the required change in this outer donut to make commitments, I should say, be 1 day longer. So instead of being 3, it becomes 4 or maybe 5 at the outset for lower 48 movements. And then, because of what he believes is a lack of, again, to use his term, precision in how things operate, he's going to recalibrate the operating plans at facilities to make things run more efficiently. And included in that is some changes in how they staff places. They're going to change some investment practices to have the right equipment, to have the correct footprint and processing capacity. They're going to do some changes to how they use the network distribution centers, the old BMCs, and then they're going to try to have better technology in place to make things run better. Of course, there are several questions derived from this. The first being, if things aren't being done correctly now to enable meeting the service standards, why not just do them correctly to meet them? And why has the current technology not been fully implemented and used to enable efficiency? We talked about over the holidays how they didn't do their first in, first out processing. That isn't a failure of technology. It's a failure of using technology. So, garbage in, garbage out. If you don't use the tech, and if you don't put the right information in, if you don't use the technology correctly, the best technology in the world makes no difference. And again, on the idea of service standards being changed, this is analogous to saying, well, no kids can pass the test, so instead of teaching them better, we're just going to make the test easier. It's the same idea, but we'll see where this goes. Changing service standards has to go to the Postal Regulatory Commission. So the PRC will have to be provided with a formal filing in this regard, and then there will be a chance for public input before they review the whole case and make a decision as to whether the Postal Service can go forward with their proposal. So this is not a done deal. The next thing, of course, has to do with transportation and retail. Excuse me. Again, we're talking about the PMG's perspective on surface versus air, and how he wants to improve how those are used. Nothing wrong with improving them. Just as nothing wrong with trying to improve how your delivery units operate and how delivery routes are organized. All that's a good idea, so long as it's part of a coherent plan, which they are telling us here they believe it is. They want to make some changes to delivery units to put little parcel sorters in them. And I find this to be an odd one, to transform, is their word, retail facilities into what they call go-to destination centers. Now, I don't exactly know what they plan to do at post offices, but the function of a post office seems to be fairly straightforward. So how they intend to make it a go-to destination is yet to be fully explained. They want to look at adding things they call public trust services, like getting passports and so forth, and doing other things for local government, national government. That idea has been around for a while, but how much it's going to save the functionality and value of post offices remains to be seen. A subtle thing here is the notion of realigning the retail network, talking about evaluating low traffic stations and branches. Stations and branches are subparts, if you will, of large post offices. There are stations and branches of the Washington Post Office, the Baltimore Post Office, New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, and so forth. And then they talk about expanding access and services based on market demand. Now, that could be some sort of a code for saying we're going to look at how much market demand there is at small post offices, not branches or stations, but the same idea, looking and seeing where these facilities, these brick and mortar facilities, are being used or not, and then making adjustments. Of course, anybody who watches this type of activity would know that it's not impossible, very, very difficult to actually close a postal retail facility. If it's a contract station, a village post office, that's not really a USPS operated facility. And therefore it's it is less protected from closure. But if you've got a small post office in Podunk, or a station of a big city post office or a branch, closing that is subject to a process, a proceeding, if you will, before the Postal Regulatory Commission. If anybody chooses to question it. And invariably, somebody does choose to question such things. So I think Mr. DeJoy may be facing something he hadn't really anticipated if he expects to be able to make any significant inroads in the cost or structure of post offices, of USPS post offices nationwide. Making them more worthwhile, making them contribute more revenue would certainly be a good idea. But pulling back any on the current number of 31,000 and change by eliminating those that are simply not profitable is a third rail, if you will, in the postal context. Looking next, you've got at pricing and legislative proposals. The worrisome phrase for anybody who is a commercial mailer or the client of a commercial mailer is the one at the top there: implement new pricing authorities. Last November, as you may know, the Postal Regulatory Commission completed its 10-year review of the rate setting process and decided that process was not working to achieve one of the goals set by statute, namely to enable the financial stability of the Postal Service. Now, why the Postal Service was not financially stable is fairly obvious, because you look at the pre-funding obligation, mandating it to kick in $5 billion plus every year for 10 years. And that's a major factor. It isn't the only reason they were losing money, but it's one of the biggest reasons why they were financially unstable. But the Postal Regulatory Commission had no choice but to make changes to the rate setting process, which it did. And as soon as those came out, the Postal Service, some of the Postal Service's top ranks were just absolutely salivating over the chance to get this additional revenue. Since that happened, there has been a consistent and clear message from the industry saying that any attempts to raise prices at this point would be foolish because price sensitivity right now is greater than ever. People are hardly doing any mailing at all, as we just discussed a few slides back. Plus, the service is so poor right now that it'd be insulting to tell people to pay more for that kind of service. How much they've listened to this, we don't know, but clearly the idea of raising prices has not fallen from their mind. I like the phrase judicious and prudent strategies. That's in the eye of the beholder. And to holistically review our pricing strategy, again, means, what does that mean? Does it mean we're going to look at it as an entity to figure out how to make more money, period? Or is it going to be something which is going to be viewed with balance about how much revenue is going to be gained versus how much business is going to be lost? So how much of the thinking that we would like to have injected here is actually going to be present in these deliberations remains to be seen. Legislative action. Obviously, Congress is being relied upon here to contribute in one form or another many tens of billions of dollars toward the attenuation of debt that the PMG wants to achieve. By integrating Medicare, postal health plans into Medicare, they can save a lot of money. The money that's already been paid into the pre-funding fund would probably be sufficient to cover any obligations there, and would negate the need for any such pre-funding. If that doesn't happen, of course, they also want to have the pre-funding obligation simply erased, that there is no longer an obligation. Even the Office of Management and Budget has stopped treating this as a debt by the Postal Service because they've considered there's never going to pay it, so why worry about it? And they also want to have some corrections made in how the retirement funds allocate responsibility for former post office department employees, people who are drawing retirement, but who worked for the former post office department, which goes back to 1971. And why is the Postal Service carrying forward that debt? So there are some things that Congress needs to do. And of course, relying upon politicians to act is never a solid plan for success, I don't think. You've got other things, issues. All right, what's the deal here for us? Well, for commercial mailers, the biggest problem is we didn't have any input. Notwithstanding what the plan claims repeatedly about, stakeholder input, which would embrace employees, unions, postal executives, ratepayers, associations, and so forth. Anybody that I've talked to, and anybody I've talked to has talked to in the industry says, no, they haven't talked to me. So where this industry input came from, in what form it was provided, how extensively it discussed the issues, and how much it was incorporated into the thinking of postal executives or the PMG and formulating this plan is a really open question. We're also concerned about how much there are all these eggs being put in the parcel basket, if you will. Yes, it's great to have the revenue from parcels, but as we've discussed, this is by no means something on which you should rely for your future stability of revenue. There is the absence of focus on standards for marketing mail. It's all about degrading service for first class, which is bad in its own right. But how about some standards for marketing mail? If you're going to pay what you pay for postage for marketing mail, it's not as much as you pay for first class. That's true. But even so, you should have a better sense of when it's going to be delivered than just sometime. And over the course of the past few months, sometime has been a long time. And that is not something which was particularly heartwarming to people who are considering how to spend their marketing money in the future, distributing it between online things, on ads on Facebook or whatever, or ads on TV or radio, or ads in newspapers, or ads in mail. So if you're going to have an unattractive service that's going to be more expensive, clearly you've got an issue for those who are the users of that service, as well as the providers, the people who serve those customers, such as commercial mailers. And of course, the big thing again is the pricing authority. If you looked at an annualized cost of living authority right now, it would be just under 1.1%. But of course, the annual one wouldn't apply because it hasn't been a year. The Postal Service used the August CPI in 2020 in its October 2020 filing for the rates that went into effect in January of this year. So they wouldn't be able to use the formula they used then again until next October, based upon the CPI of next August. There is a different formula that would apply right now, and that would give them a CPI capped authority of just under 0.7%. Not much money, but that's what they could get under the current structure. Under the new authorities that were granted by the Postal Regulatory Commission in November, there are three types. Density refers to the declining number of pieces per delivery stop, and is an attempt to compensate for the corresponding loss of revenue and increase in expense. And under that, what we call density authority, they could get 4.5% more revenue. Retirement is a dedicated increase that would go to pre-funding, again, if we still have that, and that would be just south of 1.1%. And then there's a third category for what they call non-compensatory or underwater rates, such as all of periodicals and some categories of marketing mail flats. The PRC gave the Postal Service another 2% authority that will be devoted just to those classes and subcategories or categories of mail, if they choose to use it. So add all that up, you're looking at a big increase, somewhere around 7 or 8%, which would seem to the average person to be a lot to ask of ratepayers under the current circumstance, under any circumstances, but particularly under the current circumstances. So what the Postal Service is going to do in this regard, because they're going to be, where's the slide here, judicious and prudent, what they're going to do remains to be seen. And of course, judiciousness and prudence are things that in this regard are going to be in the eye of the beholder. So these are things that are of concern to commercial mailers. Generally, you might ask, you have all this plan laid out here as if it's a done deal. How about the new governors? You're going to have 3 new people coming in here if the Senate confirms them. And are they going to want to pull back and say, wait a minute, we need to rethink some of these things? And you have political interference. Looking at how the Postal Service is expecting it can make some changes to its processing infrastructure. I would point out the experience about how many years ago was it now? 2012 or so, maybe even before that, when the Postal Service wanted to rationalize its network, decreasing the number of plants from 450 to around 250, 220, and how much flack they got from Congress about that. Obviously, the unions are opposed to anything that would impact their members, particularly the clerks union. So they're going to oppose any kind of facility changes, any kind of retail changes that would impact their membership. And they have significant leverage in Congress. So and there are still facilities that are open to this day because of the resistance years ago that the proposal to close them generated. So how are you going to make changes to facilities without political interference is a trick that I'd like to see them pull off. As I said before, there's no mention to what's going to happen, no mention in the plan that explicitly discusses underutilized post offices. And there are post offices throughout America that are open 2 hours a day, 4 hours a day, and that get very, very little business and that do not cover their costs. The majority of post offices don't cover their costs. So whether that's going to be something that's going to be addressed here, I don't know, but that is a very, very dangerous political third rail when it comes to trying to address those facilities. And of course, there are some chickens that have been counted here. And it's not by any means guaranteed that some of the assumptions that they've made in this plan are going to come true. They apparently are thinking the PRC is going to approve the service standard changes, that they're going to approve the pricing proposals that are going to be produced at some point, and that they're not going to back appellants should the Postal Service try to close facilities, close post offices, and those local customers appeal those. The assumptions also seem to be that Congress is going to cooperate. Well, I think anybody who's even slightly watched what Congress does knows that they're very happy to get up on their hind legs and talk about all the things somebody should do. But when it comes time to actually enabling those changes, it's a whole nother issue. Changing the current rules about Medicare integration, about pre-funding, about the retirement obligations. Those are things which many in Congress can say, oh, that's a great idea. Yes, that should be done. And we wholly support it. But when it comes down to going onto the floor and voting in favor of the appropriate legislation, that's a whole other issue. It's easy to say something should be done when you're not the one who hasn't got to do it. So we'll see how some of these things turn out. It's like buying electric mail trucks. It would be a wonderful idea to buy more electric mail trucks. However, who's going to pay for it? As PMG DeJoy very accurately said at one point, we'd be happy to have more if you'd help us pay for them. So again, it's a matter of Congress putting its action and its money where its mouth is. Parcel volume, we talked about this. They've assumed it's going to continue to be retained and grown. And I wish them luck. I hope they're right, but I would not make any such assumption, nor would I base any of my future plans based upon that, because it's just too volatile and it's just way too open to competition by very experienced and capable private sector competitors. And of course, the labor unions are going to have their own issues. The clerks union has already come out with a statement saying it's not going to support some of the things that have been proposed because of how it will affect its members. The clerks union, the APWU, has never been given blessed with a lot of foresight when it comes to things, preferring to protect the short-term interests of their members rather than looking at the long-term health of the institution that supports them, that pays their wages. So we'll see what happens there. The carriers union has yet to make any kind of a strong statement either way. So what's going on besides that? Well, gee, Mrs. Lincoln, how was the play? You've got other things going on here with state laws about tax and taxes and privacy, which are flowering again this spring. Those are concerned to commercial mailers for obvious reasons. If you have any activity in the international sector, you've got more self-declared rates coming online this year and the use of non-governmental partners in moving product from the U.S. to other countries. So there's a whole new world opening up if you're an international mail customer. And then we have this pandemic thing still going on until we all get our shots, or all keep our masks on or whatever we have to do. Things aren't going to go, the pandemic isn't going to go away, and that's going to continue to suppress business activity. It's going to continue to have an impact on the postal workforce and everybody else's, and it's going to continue to have a negative impact on mail volume, which of course impacts those who would be mailing, the choices of marketers and those companies who serve that clientele. So, aside from the 10-year plan, there's a whole bunch of other bad stuff going on in the background that has nothing to do with the Postal Service necessarily. So what are you going to do about all of this? Well, here's the pitch. Obviously, you've got to do something to keep yourself informed. Now, yes, we have a group here. We have a newsletter. We have webinars. We have all the things that an association serving the commercial mailing segment would provide. Yes, but whether you subscribe to us or not, you've got to stay informed. Because if you're a commercial mailer or a commercial mailer's client and you don't know what's going on in as volatile an atmosphere as this is, you really, really are out in left field. So whether you're using our services or the many services of the Postal Service, the documents it produces, Postal Pro, postal bulletins, the Federal Register things, which are just fun to read but still give you information, what you have to keep informed. You have to know what's going on, and you have to be aware in order to be a really knowledgeable participant in this whole conversation and know what's going to happen so that when it does happen, it's not a complete surprise. So with all that, if no one is out there in tears, Sylvia, Dave, anybody have any questions?
Hi, Leo. That was really an eye-opening session with a lot of information in there. I do have a few questions that came in though during the presentation, and some of these might be a little tough. I don't want to put you on the spot, but just kind of looking for your opinion on a few things. One of the questions was, do you think this new 10-year plan is a good thing overall for the Postal Service, and how worried should we be about the stability of the USPS in general?
I think it's important for the Postal Service to have a plan, to have a clear-eyed evaluation of its situation and a logical and organized approach to addressing the issues that the situation requires it to address. Whether the current plan is it, I think it's open to debate. I don't think it's bad. I mean, obviously it points out a lot of things that have to be done. I think it's a little bit focused on the PMG's own perspective of the way the world is. He is a logistics executive who has a business background in that market, in that business, if you will. He looks at things from a private sector perspective and doesn't necessarily appreciate the experiences of his predecessors. More and more, you see situations in which, the previous PMGs, well, Megan Brennan, Pat Donahoe, Jack Potter, going back, are kind of thrown under the bus here for not having taking the bull by the horns and fix some of the problems that he's coming in now and saying, well, look at this. Well, I think it's easy to say, look at this, without knowing why it's this. And it's easy to say that something should be fixed without understanding the complexity of actually doing the fixes. This is not a private sector business. It is not, XPO logistics. It moves a very complex variety of products that are what they are because of statutory requirements. You've got a regulator, and you've got the 535 smartest people in the world up on Capitol Hill, all of whom are telling you what to do and what you should be doing, how you should be doing it. You've got very intransigent labor unions. So you've got a lot of factors that don't make it easy to just say, oh, this is a problem. Here's how I'm going to fix it. Like it's going to happen. It's not that simple. And I think that's the biggest flaw in this plan, is that it has an attitude of saying, well, look what we found. This should be fixed. Here's how we're going to fix it next. And it just ain't that easy. But no, there's something needs to be done about a lot of the things that he's found. I just don't know if it's going to be quite as simple as you would make it think it's going to be.
Right.
What should mailers do? I think that the mailers need to be buckled in and ready for the ride.
Okay, that's probably
put your seatbelt on and put your tray table in full upright and lock position.
Exactly. Another question here. Do you have any idea when Congress might approve the 3 Board of Governor nominations? Is that being fast-tracked at all, or what's the plan for that?
I do not. In fact, I tried to find out just earlier this week about where things stand, of course. And they're in the mix with a bunch of other things. In our little world, getting them on there may be very, very important. In the larger world of what the politicians on the Hill want to do, they may be inconsequential. Suddenly that's a small fish in a very, very big pond. So I don't know where they would be. They may be reported. They have to have a hearing before the committees, the Senate committee, first of all. I haven't seen that scheduled as yet or heard about that. They have to be favorably reported out to the Senate. The Senate has to put it on their calendar. Senator Schumer, who's, I guess, would be setting up that calendar, would have to say, we're going to bring that up to a vote. And you have to have that vote and not have someone like Senator Sanders decide he doesn't like somebody and he's going to block it. So I'd like to say this is going to happen fairly quickly, but I don't know. I don't know for a fact when it's going to happen.
Okay, fair enough. Another question regarding what should we tell our clients as far as our nonprofit marketing mail clients when the mail delivery times are so erratic. Sometimes things deliver in a couple days. Sometimes the same mailing is delivering in 10 days. Sometimes it's delivering in 3 weeks. Any thoughts on that?
I wish I had a better answer, but really it's very much dependent upon not just the usual things that you'd always say, how is your finest level of pre-sort and a good barcode and so forth and destination entry, but it's also now it's a matter of what is the condition of the facilities through which the mail will be traveling. There was a report that came out last week about Cleveland. And the debacle that was over the holidays, and they had pictures. The Inspector General did the audit, and they had pictures of the trucks lined up outside the facility waiting to unload. About the dock and the floor being just jammed up with containers of parcels, containers of mail, pallets of mail. If you're that's not as bad as it now as it was then, but such situations as that were not isolated to just Cleveland. It also happened in Baltimore. It happened in Chicago, Detroit, other places during the holiday season. Many of those have eased now, but if you've still got the underlying factors that contributed to that, lack of adequate personnel, lack of processing space, an imbalance in the mail coming through, congestion, a failure of management to follow FIFO, first in, first out discipline, and so forth, then you're going to find those kinds of facilities are going to remain problematic. And since the carrier at the other end could be, I deliver whatever I got, the carrier can't deliver what he hasn't got or she hasn't got. So it's all about these particular nodes in the network and whether or not they're congested. If you're sending things from the East Coast to the West Coast or other distances that would normally involve air transport, if it's first class, then you could continue to see some delay because of the lack of transport. But even in that case, it's a matter of what is the status of the facilities through which the mail is traveling. Is it going through an NDC that is congested? Is it going through a plant that's congested? Is it going through more than one of such situations? And so those are all things that are very hard to understand or to explain to clients without having very granular real-time information about that. And we Mailers Hub, we're working on some tools to provide that, but those aren't quite ready yet.
Okay, perfect. I think we have time for one more question real quick. What are the expectations for the price increases? I know, everyone is that's really the question that's on everyone's mind. When might the rates go up and how much might it be? I mean, the 7 to 8% is.
Well, I have the answer to that question right here next to tomorrow's lottery numbers. So I don't know. It's the Postal Service has heard, has heard loud and clear from the industry, as we mentioned, about the lack of wisdom that a significant price increase mid-year would represent. You saw on the slide that what they have right now, if they wanted to use just the CPI, it would not even be 0.7% increase. But that's not what the problem is. The problem is all the rest of these variables these new authorities they could choose to exercise. There is a lot of interest in doing this. The PMG has said that increasing revenue is a major part of his plan to dig out of what they say is this $160 billion loss over 10 years. So I fully expect them to do something to increase prices, probably not to the extent that they could, but probably a good deal more than what the 0.68% authority right now would represent. If they're going to file based upon that number, they have to do so before the let's see what we are in March. I guess before the March CPI comes out sometime in mid-April, because at that point the numbers change, and they'd have to recalculate some of the percentages. If you had to project where the worst increases are going to fall, well, first of all, you can take off the table any kind of changes to competitive products, because that's not what they're talking about right now. All this conversation has been about the market dominant products, first class, marketing mail, periodicals, and some package services. They can do what they want, literally, as far as the competitive products, at when and how much they want, based upon market assessments. But as far as what they would do on the market dominant side, the first ones to be given attention may well be those that are underwater. Periodicals somewhere is like 60% cost coverage. That is such an egregious shortfall in the appropriate coverage of cost that they've got to address that. Why it's that way, because those are largely flats, is a matter of conversation, because the Postal Service's processing of flats is far from being the most cost efficient way it could be done. But if I had to say where they're gonna aim the increase at, I would say it's going to go first toward those to try to bring up those that are underwater. If they decide to somehow use the approach of raising prices on those where they have the highest opportunity for markup, where's the highest contribution coming from, that would be first class and some of the marketing mail categories. But because of how sensitive those are right now to the price increase, looking at how service has been especially, I wouldn't want to raise those prices. So, but again, my crystal ball is not working right now concerning what Louis DeJoy and his team are thinking about doing.
Okay. I have just a couple more, if we could squeeze these questions in. Do you know of any issues with priority mail and their mail tracking system? I have an attendee who's saying that they recently have experienced some issues where they've shipped things priority mail and didn't even show up in their tracking at all.
That could be a lack of discipline in terms of scanning the barcode and the piece at the facilities through which it's moved. I know priority mail, because it depends upon air transportation, has been taking very circuitous routes to go from A to B. And if the people who are handling those pieces are not doing their job and scanning the pieces upon arrival or dispatch, then that could account for the lack of scans and the lack of tracking information. That would be my best guess.
Okay. And then one last question. This is probably for mail tracking, but I have a question from an attendee regarding what is the best service to use for tracking?
Oh, it's got to be Pro. Dave, I got to do it. SailWorks. That's it, Dave. that's the request.
I was not the one who asked that question.
I don't know. I think got your fingerprints all over it.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, that concludes the questions. We're finishing just a couple minutes under time, a few minutes before 2:00. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. As I mentioned at the beginning, you will receive a link to the full recording as well as a handout of the slides to have access to all of that information. Thank you again very much for attending, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you, Leo.
You're welcome.
Yep,
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Leo. Bye-bye.